Okay, welcome back everyone. What you're looking at here is a short summary video, if you wish, on Module 2, Critical Thinking and Organizing. This video will give a brief explanation or a summary explanation on the concept of critical thinking, as well as the organizing of those critical thoughts. So let's go ahead and proceed. Okay, critical thinking is something that we obviously do not do very often. Most of our thinking is what we call subjective thought. And in most cases, about 90% of our thinking is subjective thought, which is the everyday biased, rum-dum type of thinking. However, subjective thought is extremely important to our survival. So that's why we do it often. The other that we need to talk more about is what we call critical thinking. Taking a look here, we see that critical thinking is thinking about your thinking as you are thinking in order to improve your thinking. Just by the statement, the definition that I've created about critical thinking, you can see that this is something that is complex and frankly takes some time to do. As we critically think, we must be aware of our 90% subjective thinking. It is something we do all the time. As I mentioned earlier, it is biased and it can influence your thinking. Now, we did talk about where our biases come from. They can come from culture, from our exposure to family and friends, from the environment, from the news, from any number of different ways. The problem with biased thought is that it is one-sided. It is not necessarily bad thinking, but it is one-sided, and we need to keep that in mind. Critical thinking must incorporate all possible avenues, all possible implications in it without having a biased opinion. We must consider these biases that can influence our thinking and what to do with them. Now, we can't really incorporate them, but we need to be aware that they are there and that they can skew our critical thinking. So we need to be aware of that. We must eliminate, probably the number one concern is the emotional inferences that come with our subjective thought. Now, there's no room at all for emotion in critical thinking. Emotion is one of the largest biases we have. Again, it is very a positive thing for our general normal day-to-day activity, but when it comes to critical thinking, it must be eliminated. Critical thinking is very logical and it is very structured thinking. Simply by this, we know that it is complex and it is time-consuming. It does not come easy. It actually can be very difficult, but the more that you do it, the more often that you do it, the better off your critical thinking will be at the end. Again, this is something that we need to also do early on in life, because as we get older, around 30 or so, our ability to enhance our critical thinking diminishes considerably. Not that you will never ever be able to critically think, but the ability to enhance our ability to increase critical thought diminishes. Again, it is not easy and it takes time, but it is most important when we are talking about business decisions. The knee-jerk subjective thinking that we typically do has little importance in the business world. So what do we do once we critically think? Well, we have all these great thoughts bouncing around in our heads, but simply because they are very complex thoughts, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to organize all of these thoughts into some logical manner. So again, critical thinking is most important. However, the need to organize these thoughts is as if maybe not more important. Having great thoughts is one thing, but organizing them, and in our particular case, so the receiver of a message can logically understand them in the meaning that we want them to be realized, can be a difficult thing. Organized, there's many ways of doing it. There are graphic organizers, there are mind maps, people doodle, people draw pictures, but I think what we want to use primarily for our purpose is the very simple and very basic outlining, essay outlining, writing outlining. Now, again, as the increase of complexity comes, as in business considerations, so is the need and demand for organizing of the thoughts. Again, the basic, simple outline is the best approach that I think we go with. Now, let's talk a little bit more about this thing called outlining. Well, as you can see in the bottom right corner of the slide, we do have a very, very simple outline. Now, it does not show probably what you learned in composition and English back in grade school and elementary school and middle school. You start with a Roman numeral 1, then you go to the letter A, capital letter A's, B's, C's, and so on and so on. This actually uses images, graphics, which are fine, and that's not the concern. The issue is, if you look again at that particular diagram in the bottom right corner, you see the indentations which suggest the logical progression of thought, and that's what is most important for you and eventually the reader of your information. Again, outlining is a pre-writing activity. It must be done before you even start hitting the keyboards on your essay. And if you do it, what is nice about it, it captures your thoughts in written logical order. Unless having them in your head and they're constantly floating around and bouncing around, and you try to type based on what's in your head, if you have it on paper, you follow it, and you have a general tendency not to miss anything. It provides and ensures structure, not only to the thought, but also for the logical progression and structure of your written document. It's simply review to ensure that you also have complete content information. By looking at this particular, the themes from the movie Mrs. Doubtfire, if there was one that was missing, you would probably be able to see it very quickly, very easily, using the outline. If you were to start typing it, you may have a tendency to miss something. So the outline also helps ensure completeness of the content. Again, the outline is a skeleton of the initial draft, and I'm going to say initial draft because you may have multiple drafts before you get to the final. But again, it is the skeleton. The drafts are where you put the, shall we say, the muscle, the skin, the tissue, or fleshing out the words of your essay. In the outline, the most important thing that you need to have at the top of the outline, other than the title, is the thesis or your purpose statement. Now, the thesis or your purpose statement is the reason why you are outlining, or the reason why the reader is going to read it. The best way to start this off is the purpose of this whatever essay, memo, letter, report is to what? Is to request information, is to share information, is to seek information, is to what? Provide the reader with something that you want to supply them. Again, the thesis purpose statement should be the only thing that is in a complete, thoughtful sentence. The remainder of the outline should be in thoughts, paraphrases, words, again, something that you will be able to generate meaning from, but not in complete sentences. Again, the reason why we don't want to write these in complete sentences, we fall into a trap of like connecting the dots. You move sentence below it up, and next thing you know, you've got paragraphs formed. Well, yes, you have paragraphs, but the problem is you all have disjointed paragraphs. The content is disjointed. While each sentence may be a thoughtful, logical item, the combination of these as a paragraph are not logical, necessary logical order. So again, do not fall into that particular trap. Outlines, the indenting again also provides the logical progression and the transition. Again, is it necessary? No, but it certainly does help flow with the thought pattern that we have here. Again, outlining is very important. You will be creating a few outlines for the assignments that you will be doing. Again, it is probably the best way to thoroughly organize your critical thinking component. This ends the Module 1 overview, and thank you for listening.